Welcome to a practical webinar for educators titled First Psychological Aid. My name is Natalia Yeremieva, and I work as advisor at European Wergeland Center, Oslo, Norway. This webinar today is organized by the European Wergeland Center that has been operating in Ukraine starting 2013 and is known to many of you thanks to the program Schools for Democracy that is aimed at supporting reforms in education. We constantly stay in touch with educators from various parts of Ukraine, practically from the first days of war, and we see how difficult it is for teachers to overcome the psychological burden. Teacher during war is much more than simply a person conveying knowledge. It is a friend, advisor, psychologist, an adult who knows how to listen to the child and calm them down. But in the first place, this is an ordinary person, father or mother, son or daughter, person with their traumas, anxieties, fears, and their experience. By helping you, the teachers, we are helping your families, your students, their parents, and the entire community. If you don't learn how to help yourselves, it will be extremely difficult for you to efficiently help others. We constantly receive lots of questions from teachers from Schools for Democracy Network, and the majority of them lately have to do with psychological aid and self-care. This is exactly why our colleagues, psychologists from Norway, prepared video materials for you on how to respond to crisis situations about psychosocial support and adaptation at schools, which you can find on our Facebook page. We always welcome the best experts in their field. This time, this is Norwegian Center for Traumatic Stress Studies, the leading institution in Norway that aims to help prevent and decrease the consequences of violence and traumatic stress for health and society. And one more organization, Regional Center for Traumatic Stress and Suicide Prevention. This is a Norwegian regional institution, an educational space that provides practical advice to services working with trauma, violence, and suicide prevention. Before I give the floor to our speakers, I would like to emphasize several technicalities. In the course of the webinar, you are welcome to submit your questions in the chat box in Zoom or on Facebook page where you're watching our live stream. We will collect all of your questions and we will definitely address them in the end of our webinar. So please welcome Belinda Ekornås, clinical psychologist from Norwegian Center for Traumatic Stress Studies, and Lars Lyster, clinical psychologist from Regional Center of Traumatic Stress and Suicide Prevention. Belinda and Lars, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for having us. And I want to underline some of what you have already said, because the audience today, teachers in Ukraine and teachers outside Ukraine, I think you have an incredibly important job. And sometimes it might feel like a burden as well, because it's not only education, as has been said, but it's about being a safe adult, being this anchor in an ocean of chaos, which many of the kids will feel right now. We have prepared some slides which might be somewhat of a repetition on what we've already said in part one, but the second part of today's webinar will focus on the questions that you have already submitted. And as already said, if you have any more questions, just type and add them to the chat, and we will try to answer them in the last 15-20 minutes of our talk today. We can start with showing our first slide. There we go. Well, our second slide, I guess. See? No. If I could have the next slide. Yeah. And this is actually just a repetition. And it's so important for us to tell you and to normalize that everyone, and this is not only for the children, this is for all adults as well. These are examples of reactions children and adults might have during and after a crisis. And the reason I say it's important to normalize it is that many might feel that they are unusual, or they feel or experience this much differently than others. But if we address these as normal reactions, it's easier to tackle them, it's easier to talk about them, and it's easier for the people that experience them to express what they feel, what they think, and what they experience. We will get back to some of these reactions when we answer some of the questions, but just to remind you that there's a wide scope that goes from thoughts in your head to feelings in your body to reactions and behavior. And many of you have felt them already. And it's important to say that most of these reactions will pass over time. And they are a result of the stress and the traumatic stress that you are experiencing right now. We're not talking about symptoms that needs treatment. We're talking about normal reaction to a traumatic event that we and you should not be exposed to.
Yes, as Lars said, we are not talking about treatment for these reactions, but there are many things you can do. And both for better sleep, for behaviors, and also for emotions. And we have got a lot of questions, especially concerning emotions like anxiety and fear and loss of somebody. So this is things we are going to address in this later in the presentation. But if I can get the next slide.
And just to point out the last on this slide is that it's so important to not mystify this. There's always a reason why we act, behave, and feel as we do. It's just important for caring adults to be curious and to ask and to be able to kind of talk about it without adding shame or without adding extra reactions.
Yes, and when we talk about reactions, they follow the developmental phase the children are in. So children that are from 1 to 4 may fear the dark or become clingy. And this is attachment behavior because they will seek out their parents and other important grown-ups to be comforted. And just as Lars said that you have a very important job as a safe adult for children, as a teacher, the parents have a very important job for their children and to make them feel safe. And and this is important to communicate to the parents that if they are able to feel safe and make their children feel safe as possible in this situation, of course, this will help the children regulate. And children are very robust. So if they feel that they are safe, they can endure a lot. When it comes to 5 to 10-year-olds, you can see anger and attention-seeking behavior and concentration loss. And this is, of course, also normal in adults. So many of you have talked about or sent in questions about the problems with concentrating. And this is true for both you and for children and pupils and everybody in a crisis. In a crisis, it's hard to concentrate because you focus on other things. And the activation, which we are going to talk more about, the stress, which Lars mentioned, is making it hard to concentrate, and it's also making it easier to become angry and irritated. So that is also normal reactions, and you can see them in 5 to 10 years old. And also you can see magical thinking. If I hadn't been angry with my mother, then it wouldn't have happened. And it's important to address magical thinking, not by saying just, no, that was not the reason, but to explore, like Lars talked about. It's important to explore. Why did you think it was your fault? For 11 to 30 years old pupils, they can have problems with behavior and school and friends, loss of appetite, and they can act as if they don't care. And this is important to know because that can be provoking, and then they don't get the comfort they need. So it's important to know that one strategy is to pretend you don't care. For the 14 to 18-year-olds, you can see a lack of interest and energy. Also behavioral and concentration problems. And shame and guilt. And shame and guilt we are going to talk more about because that's very common in many crises, that we start to feel guilty. So that's an important issue. And if you see the 14 to 18-year-old lack of interest and energy, it's also normal when you're a teenager. But these traits are sort of more and become more visible in a crisis. And the same is for the 1 to 4-year-olds. They can be clingy, but in a crisis, they will do it more. And that's a normal reaction.
And what you have already seen, I guess, is that you have children who act younger than their age should. Well, they act younger than you would expect. And it's okay, because I think our mission here today is to say it's normal. We don't have to go right now and fix it, because these are normal reactions. And if we reduce the stress, if we are adults who are caring and are able to talk and approach them in a way that is safe and is able to regulate them through online education or otherwise, this is the best way in. And of course, that the parents of these children know that these reactions are normal, because as Belinda said, for the youngest children, their need is often towards a parent who is safe and there, who can say, this is okay, and I'm here for you, and might repeat over and over and over again, as we'll come back to, the many questions these children might have, because they're trying to cope, and it's important that we help in their coping strategies.
Yeah, and just as you said, Lars, to say that it's normal often is a big relief, because both grown-ups and children can start wondering, what's wrong with me? Why do I suddenly become so angry? So just to know that this is normal is actually good in itself. So
and of course telling yourself that, because we might demand a lot of you because you as adults are in a crisis yourself. So in parallel, we have to regulate ourselves. We need to say that it's okay that I forget. It's okay that I don't function like I normally do. But your function will reappear when the stress subsides. We can go to our next slide. And here we want to introduce to you a short movie, and we will talk more about it after the movie, right?
Yeah, we can just say that this movie was originally made for the Australian Defence for Veterans, because to help veterans who had been to war. So you will see a clip of a soldier in the beginning, because it was originally made, but the same functions and the same processes is in all our bodies.
Yeah.
So yeah.
An example of the importance of breathing. We don't have sound.
них повпливати, навіть якщо ми намагаємося. Дихання також відбувається автоматично, але воно відрізняється, тому що ми можемо його контролювати, коли хочемо. Дослідження показують, що коли ми свідомо починаємо контролювати наше дихання, ми можемо впливати на функціонування та результативність нашого тіла. А це означає, що дихання – це корисний інструмент для управління стресом. Наше тіло має природну систему сигналізації. Це реакція, яка називається «бийся або тікай». Коли ось ця сигналізація вмикається, гормони стресу, такі як кортизол і адреналін,
affected, and we tend to take short, shallow breaths using our chest. This upsets the balance of oxygen and carbon dioxide in the body, heightening the stress reaction. There are situations where the fight or flight response can be a real benefit. Rapid reactions can save your life or the lives of your mates. But fight or flight isn't always the best response. It's an immediate reaction, and if triggered by everyday stresses, it can lead to problems. Breathing works best when we breathe slowly and deeply using our diaphragm. Making a conscious effort to breathe slowly can flick the body's alarm system back to standby. The calming influence of slow, deep breathing resets the balance of oxygen and carbon dioxide in the body. Deep breathing also reduces our heart rate and blood pressure, reduces lactic acid build-up in our muscles, and allows the immune system to function normally. With regular practice, deep breathing can become an automatic response to stress, allowing us to gain control of our physical reactions in high-pressure situations and increase optimal responses.
Just taking a few deep breaths made a big difference. It calmed me down, put me back in control.
Yes, as we have seen in the movie, breathing and controlled breathing is giving you, is affecting your body in different ways. It makes the adrenaline and go down, which make you feel more relaxed and less stressed. So when we are breathing down with our diaphragm down to our stomach, slowly, we are, it's easier to be concentrated and feel more calm. So breathing exercises actually can be used before you go through new material, for example, when you are educating. And it can also be used to calm down after, for example, alarms and other stressful things. So, and it's the most efficient way to reduce stress, which is important both for concentration, for your emotions, and also for stress reductions. So this is a very effective tool. And Lars is just going to guide you through one very easy breathing exercise that you can use for yourself, and you can use it in the classroom or online.
And just to repeat ourselves, during a crisis, our stress response system is activated. This system that actually keeps us alive. And this stress system is also located close to the system that has to do with breathing. So just by being able to do deep breathing exercises, it will directly affect the system that has to do with stress and response to stress. So this is just one of many techniques you can use that actually tells the body, tells the brain, you can calm down right now. Or else the brain continues on trying to look for danger, trying to look for stimuli that will make the body be in a fight or flight position. We could go to the next slide. And this is just a really quick, easy exercise, and it's called breathing in the square. And what I want you to do right now is just look around in where you're sitting. There's a square, I guess, somewhere. It might be the door, it might be the window, it might be a picture on the wall. I want you to focus on one square you find in the room where you're sitting. And what I want you to do is focus in on one of the corners. You might focus on the left upper corner. And what I want you to do is to breathe in for 4 seconds as your vision, your eyes go from the left upper corner to the right upper corner. So you do it like this, and you can do it, we can do it together. Breathe in. And you breathe out for 4 seconds, and you follow the square downwards. Breathe in, and you go to the left. Breathe out. One more time. Breathe in. Breathe out. For 4 seconds. Breathe in. And breathe out. And you don't have to do this many times before the system kind of regulates itself. Of course, in this exercise, I was talking and trying to make you figure out where you were in the square, but it doesn't matter where you start in the square. But the important thing here as well is when you visualize, you don't only use your breathing, but just by looking around the room, because you're forced to do it in the instructions, it has the ability to bring you back here and now. Because when we are really stressed and our stress response system is active, we normally focus on what's going to happen or what just happened to me. We're not here and now. And just by visualizing at the same time, it regulates as well.
And I was just wanted to say that there are techniques also for sleep. I don't want you to do them with me because I don't want you to get sleepy. But as we told you, sleep is one of the things that's affected in a crisis. But I will just tell you how you can do it if you have problems falling asleep. Then you can breathe in while you talk. 1, 2, 3. Breathe in, 3. Hold, 1, 2. And then breathe out, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Hold, 2. And then you start with 3 in again, hold 2, and then 6 out and hold 2. And this will, as you saw in the film, regulate your CO2
Level.
O2 level. So it will make your body feel very relaxed.
So we exhale the double of what you inhale.
Yeah, the long exhale. And also the thinking that you have to think 3, 2, 6, 2 will also help you not think about all the stressful thoughts. So it's have a double function. So if you have problems sleeping or you have pupils that have trouble sleeping, you can show them this technique, but not before you are going to teach them something, because then they will be really sleepy.
And of course, there are many techniques you can find online, but it's just so important that you try them on yourself beforehand. And it might be a technique that works for you, and it might be a technique that doesn't work that well for others. And I think that's why we have a wide range of different techniques. But again, the most important regulatory technique is yourself. So if you are inside your window of tolerance, it's easier to bring others inside the window as well, just by being calm yourself.
And when we talk about the window of tolerance, it's where learning can happen, where you're concentrated and where you can focus. When you're below, on top of it, you're activated and stressed. And when you're below it, you are more like relaxed and can't focus. So breathing is a good strategy to get into the window, which is, we can call it window of tolerance or learning window. Yeah. So that's and also there are many, like Lars said, apps you can find on internet, both on breathing, controlled breathing, and on mindfulness, being here and now. So you can find some which is good to use in a classroom. If you go to the internet, you can search for classroom and breathing or classroom and mindfulness, and you will find.
And you can put them, of course, in a structure. How, if before you begin a session, in the middle of a session, when you end a session, and to kind of give structure, because we're going to talk about the children's need for structure and the importance, of course, of having online learning, even if they can't go to their school, but just scheduling the day actually regulates us and helps us, even if they might not be able to learn. But we can go to our next slide.
Yeah, and also, Lars, when you are stressed and in a crisis like you are, you need more breaks. Because your concentration is shorter. You don't have as fully concentration span. So it's important to have more breaks than you usually would have when you are teaching. And in those breaks, you can, for example, do breathing techniques, or you can ask the pupils to walk around a bit to regulate. Walking is also a very good way to regulate stress and activity. So that's and you can sort of put it on the plan of the day. So you have regular breaks.
And you might, as Belinda said, just triple the amount of breaks right now. And shorter lessons, short breaks, start again, but keep the overall structure.
And that will help your pupils, but it will also help you. So like I used to say to my clients that we are now taking a breathing exercises, and that will be good for you and also for me. So, and that's the same for you.
Next slide.
Next slide. No, not the next slide.
Oh, sorry. So this slide.
This slide. We have got some questions actually about guilt and shame. And in a crisis, when everything is so different, in a war like you are now living in, and everything's so different and you don't have control, it's easy to feel guilty, because it's there's a saying that it's easier to be an devil amongst angels than an angel amongst devils. So by blaming yourself, it's actually easier to take control of the situation. So this is something we see in a lot of crises and also in war. So if we are first talking about the children, they can often feel both responsibility for their parents' feelings. They will try to protect them by not telling how scared they are, for example, or about other things, because they see that their parents are stressed. But they also can feel guilty. And as we talked about the magical thinking, they can feel that I did something wrong. That's the reason why we have problems now. So it's important to address and explore feelings of shame and guilt. And when a little child says, oh, it's my fault, we as empathic grown-ups very fast say, no, it's not your fault. But then we want to know why the children are thinking that it's their fault. So it's important to ask, why do you think it's your fault? So we can explore why. Because if we know why, we can help the child. And the same is for adults. If we feel guilty or somebody we know feel guilty for something, we can ask, why are you feeling guilty? And when you have found out why, often you will see that they are taking responsibility or feeling guilt for something that's not their fault. And then we people or humans are very harsh to ourselves. We are very harsh to ourselves. So one technique is to ask, what would you say if your best friend said this? To help the pupil shift perspective and see the situation from the outside, because we are much more compassionate and caring about when it comes to our friends. So that you can do with yourself also. If you feel guilty, you can think, okay, if this was my friend who said this, would I think that it was his or her fault? And very often the answer to that question is no. So it's very normal to feel guilt and shame, but it's also very often not correct. We assume responsibility for things that we have no control over. And I think that's a way to cope in a situation where you have little control of what's happening around you. Then a way to take control is by taking responsibility. So just knowing these mechanisms and exploring with your pupils if they feel guilt, or if you yourself or your friends feel guilt, why do you feel guilt? And also try to change the perspective. What would you say to your friend if he or she was in this situation?
And in catastrophes like this war, what we often see is a great amount of survivor guilt, that I survived and someone else died, or I left the country and someone was left behind. And it's so important, as what Belinda just said, that we have to kind of address it, talk about it, because many share the same feelings and thoughts, but they won't dare address it because they're ashamed and they feel guilty. And as Belinda said, we have to explore why. Not say it's not your fault, that's our automatic reaction, but stop and listen. And by just doing that, we're helping much more than just saying no or yes.
Next slide. And we have got some question.
Now we're over in the question part.
Yes. Yes. And
there we go. Yep.
And the first is guilt and shame. And just like Lars said, the questions we have received concerning guilt and shame is the sort of survival guilt that I'm in a safe place, but many people I know is in a area with lots of warfare, and I feel guilty for being safe, and my friends are not. And I think you have internally displaced children and adolescents, adults also, and they might experience this, feeling guilty because they escaped and many didn't. So this is something you can actually take as a team in one of your sessions, talk about this, the theme of guilt and shame. Also,
and it's just by addressing it, we are showing that it's okay to talk about. And included in all of these, we also have the feelings of jealousy, we have the feeling of anger, and we might feel ashamed just having those feelings, because right now the entire country and the rest of Europe are supposed to be kind of empathic all the time. But it's important also to address that you might have angry feelings, jealousy when it comes to family members, neighbors, whatever, who has returned home or not returned home.
Yes, and this is natural, and it doesn't mean you are a bad person or that you need to feel guilty, because it's natural that you want to return to where you were living before the war broke out, and it's natural that you wanted to flee, to not stay in a war zone. So this is sort of a brain trying to make sense of a situation that's meaningless. And then the first person we look at is ourselves, and then we start blaming ourselves. So
and what we also see is in our stress response system, if we can't fight or fight, if we are stuck, if we can't escape, what our body does automatically is go into what we call deactivation. We will show you a slide at the last slide, but where our blood pressure goes down and we are immobilized. And that happens often if you experience rape, if you experience violence you can't flee from, or if you experience torture, for example. But afterwards, you might feel guilty or ashamed for not trying hard enough. Why did you accept that this happened to you? It's so important that you don't think, is it smart now to do this or this? The brain takes over because it's useful for our survival. So if you see people who do not react in fight and flight, but react in deactivation, some of the people who have been immobilized, hiding, for example, not being an active participant, might feel ashamed. And it's just so important for us to say that this is normal. This happens, and it's our brain taking over.
It's automatic responses, which we can control. And you can see it will happen when that is the best way of survival. Yeah. For example, in sexual violence or rape, it can happen because your brain or your organism will always try to keep you alive. Yeah. And so this is not something you control. But many people can think that I should have fought harder, I should have done something. But when you're immobile, you can't.
Because during stress, our smart part of the brain is somewhat deactivated. We do not think that, we don't think through, we just do. And it's so important that this is normal. And what we do is different from person to person because we bring with us different experiences into this war that affects us as well.
And sometimes to freeze, we can also see it in animals that they freeze is the best way of survival. And then the brain will just do it. So it's not a conscious choice. The next team, there were many questions regarding worry, anxiety, and missing loved ones. So we wanted to sort of talk about that as a sort of a team. And some of one question, which is on the slide, was what can we do to overcome constant anxiety and the need to read or watch news all the time? And this is very common in wars like you are in, and also in other crises. The need for information. And it's like we talked about earlier, Lars, that the need for control. So if you can watch the TV and listen to the news, you can maybe learn something that can give you control. And all anxiety is based in a feeling of loss of control. So then we can start to be do these behaviors to try and take control. But actually looking a lot, watching a lot TV about the war may only frighten you more. So it's a strategy that activates you more and makes you more stressed. So therefore it's very smart to watch TV, set out some time to watch news about the war, and not very late, because then it can be hard to fall asleep. So maybe an hour or a half an hour in the afternoon, because if you watch all the time, you are constantly activated, and it will wear you out. And also it won't give you a control, because none of us sadly can control the war. Things are happening on a whole other level, so that's hard to accept, and it's making everybody feel very helpless and feel like they have lost the control on your life. So one strategy is to watch TV, for example, 1 hour, and also be conscious about children, because children will watch the news and maybe don't understand it. So, and they can be very frightened. So if you're going to watch news with children, you have to explain for them. Explain what's happening, and if the TV is on all the time, they will sort of get a lot of information which they can't sort of process or understand fully. So when it comes to the war, there's also a question with the 8-year-old son, which is constantly worried and asked why we had to leave home, and also worry about fathers that's in the war. And I think it's, as we talked earlier, it's important to address the worry, and also to make a story about what happened, which is coherent, not bits and pieces which you can get from the news, or a bit you have ears, so you get some information here and some information there. But it's important to tell the children a full story, and not all the gruesome details, but try to explain what is happening, because that will make the children make it easier for the children to understand. And also it's very normal that children will ask again and again. And sometimes that can feel irritating, but the reason they do it is that this is very complex and hard for them to understand. So they're asking again and again to try to understand something that's really very hard for a grown-up to understand too, which is like meaningless, like a war. So that's important to try to make a story, to be aware that children can get a lot of information from TVs and internet, which they can't understand. So try to sort of shelter them or protect them from seeing too much, and talk to them instead. Also, when
and just to add, there are fantasies are always more gruesome than reality. So if these children are left to their own, to kind of make their own story, and if they feel that just by talking about this, you as a parent or a teacher finds it's difficult, they might stop asking you, and they might try to fill in the blanks themselves. And that's important to remember, and just remember also that kids might go in and out of feelings differently than we do. We might worry and worry and worry, and be in a state in a long time, but children might be in a state and then just play and do something completely else, and go back to it. And it's okay, and we should encourage it, not say stop.
Yeah, and that's very important, Lars. That's how children regulate themselves, because they haven't been in crisis before, so they don't have the strategies that grown-ups have. So when it's too much, they start to play or do something else. And they will also, we have someone asked about playing war. And that's very common in wars, that children play war, because that's a way of trying to understand. And children understand things through play. and to drawing. And also when you talk about these things, it's okay to like draw or make a story or do it in a way that's that children normally do things. So it's very important for children to have time to play and to do other things. And when they play, it's not uncommon that they will play war, because that's what's their reality now. And that's a way of trying to understand.
Or they might play a traumatic scene in their life, and it kind of frightens us as helpers. But again, it's normal. And we should just intervene if the play gets really gruesome or if they get stuck in their play. But then we're over to what we might call therapy.
Yes. So
and just also to add on the worry bit is that we become very religious when it has to do with our thoughts, because we can also feel ashamed if we don't worry, if we don't feel for our loved ones. But it's so important that we can put our worry a bit aside. It's okay where you are right now to also feel good, to do things that gives you growth and that makes you happy. But we have to kind of schedule them in instead of the worry, because worry as a cognitive activity is seldom helpful, because you will not get to a conclusion.
Yes, and we use a lot of energy, and we can't sort of change the big picture, the situation, but we can change small things. And I think all fear and anxiety and worry comes from feeling that you don't have any control. So focus on what you can control. You can go to work, you can be a safe adult for your pupils. You're an important person in their life. You introduce normality into their life and structure, and that's the most important psychosocial advice or strategy, is to try to have some routines, try to have some normality, try to have something that's nice. Also in all of the things that are not nice. So this is very, very important. And you as a teacher is very important, just by being the role you have. And bringing in some normalcy.
And it's so important that we are capable of talking about feelings, issues that are worrisome, troublesome, because often we want to shield the children. They're thinking about this anyway, because we have questions here about missing loved ones. Just being able to address it, talk about it, miss your father or husband together, make something together and send him. If he might see it or might not see it, but do it as an activity. Do not feel ashamed by yourself alone, and do not be missing people on your own. It's easier to miss people together.
Yes, and also you can talk about, look at pictures and talk about things you have done, and that's a way of keeping your loved ones with you, even if they are not with you. So, and also if you can talk to the fathers or husbands or sons, talk about something that's important in your daily life. Often you think you have to talk about something very special. But when you're away from home, it's the small things you miss. So talk about what's happening in your everyday life, and also include children in the talks if that's possible, so they can feel a connection to their father or brother that is away in the war. I think we have also, yes, one of the question is when you are worrying so much, it's about a loved one or missing a loved one, it's hard to concentrate because it pops up in your head all the time. Thoughts about, is he safe or is she safe? What's happening? So, and this makes it hard to concentrate. And first of all, it's important to realize that in a war, it is hard to concentrate for everybody because this big thing is taking up, which is the war, is taking up a lot of your energy and concentration. That's for everybody, also teachers. But it's also important to realize that worry and fear for some loved ones will also affect your concentration. And then what you can try to do is try to think that what I'm doing right now is very important. Being here, being a teacher is very important. And try using breathing techniques or other techniques to be mindful or be here and now. But your brain is gonna start wondering what you should have done or what might happen, but try to focus on something here and now. And you can use, for example, breathing to try to do that. Because the worrying, as Lars said, you don't have to feel bad for not worrying all the time, because it takes a lot of your energy. So try to set aside some time for worrying, if that's possible. And I understand that this is very difficult not to think about when you have a loved one that which you are afraid of and worried about, afraid for. So this is I know this is not easy, but this is some techniques you can use to try to focus here and now and focus on the things you can change and you can control. Yes, and then we are on the next topic, and that is something activation and irritation, and that's something we have been talking a bit about, yeah. Lars, and here when you are stressed, your body becomes activated, just like you saw in the breathing film, that this man who was walking was like shh, because he was activated. So when he was out in the street, he was like reacted, and this is very common when you are under stress, when you are in a crisis or in a war. That you and it's a mechanism to protect you, because when we are activated, our body, we can react very fast. And in a war, that if you are on a battlefield, that's very important to react fast. That can save your life. But if you are in a town far from where the warfare is right now, if you are very activated all the time, you can be irritable and you can be angry. And this can make conflicts in the family, and also with friends, and also different groups can start pointing fingers at each other and get irritated. So it's a very common reaction in a crisis, but it can make some conflicts and problems.
And it's important to just remember that our tolerance level is lower, and many of you might be living in new houses. You might be living with others. You might be living with family members you haven't actually lived with before. And just talk about this, because conflicts will appear. And how could you kind of schedule your day? And even if we know that people love us, they can get on our nerves. And it's important, again, everything we say here, just how to address it.
Yeah.
And it's important.
And also to make some strategies, to talk about when we start to get angry. What can we do in our family? Is it best if we leave the room and go for a walk? Is it best to stop talking for a while? So you talk about it like it's a thing you can sort of put on the table and we can discuss it. So it's like, okay, when we start to get angry in the family, what can we do? Can we say pause, time out, and go? And just like, because this is something that's going to happen. So sort of to make some rules or strategies for how to solve it, or what you can do. Because when we are angry or activated or stressed, we say and do things that we really don't mean. And we can say mean things and we can do mean things. So it's so how can we sort of prevent this? So just like, it's normal to be irritated and feel angry under stress. So how can we deal with this in our family? And then you can also take this in a classroom or online. What are you can talk with your pupils and your family. What do you do when you get angry? What helps you? Oh, I like to go for a walk. I like to go to my room and listen to music. Okay, but that's the strategies we can use. So you can explore this. Often some subjects we are afraid of exploring, and often that's the most important subjects to talk about. So just normalize it. It's normal to be angry and irritable in a war time and in a crisis. What shall we do as a family? How shall we cope with it? What shall be our strategies? And the same you can do in the classroom.
And we also have a theme of questions that goes under the importance of daily life activities.
Then we can switch slides.
Switch slide. And just to remind you, and because daily life activities kind of structures our day. In a crisis where we're activated, we need this structure. We forget things. We might postpone things. We might be immobilized. But it's so important for the children right now. Maybe their ability to learn new things isn't that great. But it's so important that you have this structure where you wake up, where you eat breakfast, where you do your normal things, where you attend school. And this school day has a structure that starts at some time and ends at another time. And within that time, we can make new kind of structures because they have problems concentrating. But it's also important that they structures nice activities in their lunch break afterwards, so the day starts at some points and end at some point. And we stress this because the need for structure is there, and what we often see is that the structure kind of collapses.
And that's what I was talking about. If you remember from the anxiety and worry, it's you feel a loss of control, and routines, structures is a good strategy to feel more in control and feel more normalcy in your life. So that's very important. And many parents, because the question is if the parents don't understand why
should they go to school right now?
It's war, and that's the reason. That's something that structures. It's a routine. It helps the children feel some sort of control.
And they can, of course, meet other children who, if you as teachers can address some of the things we have talked about today, because you don't have to be a psychologist or a doctor to do this. We are showing that these are subjects you can talk about if you talk about it in a regulatorily safe way. This is a great arena to share. And you might say this is probably not educational, but I would say disagree and say yes. And for the parents who think that school is not important right now, it's the framing, the structure is all that the school gives that might not be learning your ABCs.
Yes, and the point you had, Lars, is talk about anxiety or that it's normal, loss of control. It's not mathematics, or it's not like language, but these things will help your children concentrate and focus, because they are thinking about these things, and these things are they are using a lot of their energy on it. But the next point, what are the best ways to work with internally displaced children and under online learning? We don't have best practice answer for this question, but of course I think it's important that you like we have talked about earlier, that you maybe can have online one-to-one sort of conversations with these pupils, and what are your needs, how are you in terms of concentration, what do you like, what are your motivations. So if these are new children that has come in to your digital classroom or physical classroom, it's important to get to know them, because if you know what motivates them, if you know what they like to do, if you know something about their background, it's easier to make or to use pedagogical strategies that will sort of fit them. So it's important to get to know and ask, what do you think is easy for you? What do you think is hard right now? What do you like? What motivates you? To find out. And you can do this online if you sort of schedule a one-to-one dialogue.
And if these are children that you already know that are internally displaced but still follow your lectures, just to be aware that these are additional stressors. Where are they? They might be in a new, using a lot of energy, just coping by being there somewhere new. And we should just have it in our back of our head that they might struggle on different arenas, and do not try to, and I guess if they show that they don't do as well as they used to do, it's okay, because there are other things that I think are in their head right now.
I just see that we have starting to get.
Oh, we can try to go into bereavement and loss. And we had this question where someone asked, can a school psychologist deliver information about the death of the soldier to his family? And when it comes to questions like this, I guess the answer is always yes and no. In our country, and probably your country, normally we have priests who do it, but you don't have to be a priest to do this. The important thing is, I think, is that the people we deliver this message to have someone around them that can support them. And it's more important, I think, how we say it than what we say. And it's so important that the reactions that we might see at right at that moment might be a variation of a lot of different reactions. And many people might react just in shock. And they might say, thank you, okay. And it actually takes some time just to process it. And for many of you, bereavement will be a theme because people, might have lost people, your students might have lost friends, family members. And when it comes to bereavement, there's no easy fix. And there's no, we used to say, it takes a year, but now we know it might differ very much. And the important things in bereavement is what we say is pendulation, that they might go into daily life activities and suddenly you kind of stop and you're filled with the pictures and thoughts of your dead loved ones. And if you go back and forth and back and forth, that's normality. And then hopefully this will be a sad memory. But it's so...
Or a good memory.
Or a good memory, of course, a good memory. And what the supporting is more about accepting that you go back and forth. But in the acute situation where you deliver a message, I mean, all kinds of reactions can be shown. And it's just important that we know, do this person have someone to support him or her right now?
Yeah, and also the question will come afterwards. So many are thinking about delivering the message of death, but 1 week or 3 weeks or 3 days after, then all the question comes. What happened? Was he alone? And because when you get the message, you often, as Lars say, experience some sort of shock, and then you can't take in information. So it's important that someone comes and talks and can give some information, and sometimes that can be someone from the military who knew him, or the priest or the psychologist can contact the military and get some more information, because you would want to have some information. So as Lars said, it could be the school psychologist. In Norway, it's very often the priest and if it's a sudden death, and a psychology crisis, doctor crisis, or someone who has trained in crisis. So, but the important is to remember that the question comes afterwards. So someone has to go back to the family and give more information, because they can't take it all in when they get the message of that.
And of course, when it comes to bereavement with children, as we've already said, we can often see that children kind of go in and out at a different pace than we do. We might get stuck in sadness or get stuck in a feeling or a way of thinking, but they might want to go out and play suddenly. And it's okay. They mourn in a different way often. And we adults also mourn in different ways. There is no right or wrong, and it's not like I have now mourned for 7 months. I should not mourn anymore. There's no time limit when it comes. But after a while, you might need help if you get stuck in your bereavement, and your bereavement kind of handicaps your daily life function. But this is way too early right now, because what we're experiencing now is normality.
Yeah, and also not to feel guilty if you pendle from here and now and the grief. That's normal, and children pendulate very fast. That doesn't mean that they don't understand. It's just their way of coping with the grief. But if we are going to have some time for questions, we have 12 minutes left.
We have 12 minutes left. Should we go to the last slide? And I see we just have one in the chat. This is actually a huge question, and it's a good question. It has to do with trauma, it has to do with violence, it has to do with sexual abuse. Just to say to you now, many of you and the students you have experienced what we call potentially traumatic events. These are events that might give trauma symptoms after a while. But right now, we're talking about reactions. For many, these reactions will subside normally, and they will get less and less intrusive. But some of the people you meet and yourselves might develop symptoms that you need some kind of help. And the last slide, well, go back to the last slide. Can you go back? This, yeah. And this is what we call the window of tolerance. And Belinda talked about the learning window. And I think the importance to remember is when you are stressed, if you are reactions or symptoms, this window will get more narrow. On the top red half, we have fight and flight. And on the bottom, we have demobilization or deactivation. And these are survival techniques. And what we do by giving these breathing techniques, being a safe adult, we try to widen the window of tolerance. And that's what psychological first aid is all about. And this is what treatment is all about, widening their window of tolerance or window of learning. But we have a lot of questions.
Yeah. Natalia, you have questions for us, don't you?
Belinda and Lars, thank you so very much for this substantive presentation, for the interesting question that you have collected, and for useful and interesting techniques. Yes, we do have questions. We are short on time. This is why I had to pick questions which I believe are especially relevant to the question that we haven't yet covered today. And this is a question about teachers' burnout. We received a question about what are the characteristics of burnout in teachers, and maybe you could also share some specific advice which could help teacher to self-diagnose whether he or she still has the resources, or maybe they should put themselves on hold and take care of their own psychological, mental health. So let us talk a little bit about burnout.
Yes, I think that's a very, very good question. There are many signs. You start to forget a lot. You start to be more irritable. You can start to wake up in the night or have problems falling asleep. It can be very hard to concentrate at all. It can be hard to regulate your feelings. You can suddenly start to cry out of nowhere. So,
or you might get what we call indifferent. You kind of stop
caring.
You
can't care. You sort of avoid situations where you have to feel or think. That's typical signs of burnout. And also you can start to feel like very helpless. And whatever I do, it doesn't matter. So feeling of helplessness, that's typical of burnout. And what you often see in helpers who get burnout, or helpers generally, is that you focus on helping and you forget to help yourself. So to sleep enough, to eat regularly, to take a walk if it's safe to do that, to do things that can sort of give you energy. That's very important. And to avoid things that takes your energy. If you get very depressed and very lose your energy when you watch TV, the war on TV, don't do it for a while. So try to take away the actions and the things that take your energy, and try to do more of the things that's helpful for you and that gives you energy.
And you are not Superman, and you are not Superwoman. And it's so important to accept that we also get overburdened or burned out. And these reactions always comes creeping up on us slowly, and suddenly we're there. And you have to take active control. And by doing that, we actually do things that give us energy. But we have to do it, and we have to talk to colleagues, talk to friends, and try to prevent it. And if you are stuck, it's about giving your body and brain maybe that time off, but not too long, but give you time off to get this structure and structure your day. As we said, it's important to structure the children's day.
And it's also very easy in a crisis to focus on the things you can't change. There are many things in the situation in a war zone that you can't change. So try to not focus on those things and try to focus on the little things you actually can change. And also know that you are very important. Even if you have problems concentrating, even you being there is important. But also know that when it's enough, it's enough. And then you have to do like Lars said, you have to take a break, and so you can get your energy back. And also I think people get very bad conscience for doing things for themselves, especially people who have chosen a helper education, like teachers or psychologists. We often get bad conscience for thinking of ourselves and doing good things for ourselves. But if you are going to help others, you have to have the energy, you have to help yourself first. Put on your oxygen mask before you put the mask on the child, which they say on the planes. So it's important to, if you're going to be a good teacher or if you're going to be helpful, you have to take care of yourself first.
We might have one last question, I guess. Let's see, time is running out.
Well, yes, let's try to take one more question and 2 minutes to answer it. This is also a very important question. we have an individual who's refusing help. This is also a very typical situation. And this person thinks that they can take care of themselves on their own. But according to their friends and people they know, this person is stuck. What can you do to help this individual?
Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah.
Do you want to try?
I will try. Often it's if you can find what motivates a person. Because many persons don't want to be sort of a victim and need help. But sometimes if you getting help is to play football or take a walk or go fishing, if you can do that. So instead of focusing on you need help, because maybe that's not what the person is feeling, or it doesn't sort of match the person's self-image, you can try to get the person to do things that are good for them. Not so I'm going to treat you and give you help, but come and go for a walk with me. Shall we watch a movie together? So that can be try to engage the person in positive activities. That's helpful and maybe more in line with the person's self-image. What do you think, Lars?
No, the same, and I think when it comes to children, adults, what they're doing it for a reason, and it's just important for us to address. Wow, that's great, and see what they're actually doing before we kind of try to intervene, try to give them something else. Just try to understand why, and kind of. Because there's something good in trying to keep it all together, because what happens if this person says, I actually need help? He says at the same time, I don't have control anymore.
So try to ask, to explore why the person is feeling and doing what he's doing. As Lars says, he's probably trying to cope in a very difficult situation and not to get overwhelmed by loss of control.
We did that in two minutes. Yeah. Okay. Thank you so very much for having us.
Yeah, thank you very much for listening.
And thank you so much for having joined us with your useful pieces of advice, important, interesting information. Thank you for your important words. Thank you for picking the right words. And I hope that you have managed to motivate our teachers to better care for themselves so that they can even better help others. Thank you so much, Belinda and Lars. And I would also like to thank our Norwegian partners, Norwegian Center for Traumatic Stress Studies and Regional Center for Traumatic Stress and Suicide Prevention. I'd like to remind you that we always cooperate with the best. And last but not the least, I'd like to remind you that you'll be able to re-watch this video on European Wergeland Center Facebook page and Schools for Democracy Facebook page. I encourage our teachers to watch this video again, share it with others, because as we have already realized, there is always something to learn in psychology. Take care, and I hope we'll see you soon. All the best.